Hey, so going to take a quick look at Anduin OS. This was something that was talked about a lot a few months ago when it first sort of surfaced. It was sort of touted as Microsoft's answer to Linux. Um, that came about, I think, because it was a Microsoft employee who had sort of started the project. He was actually a Chinese national who was an employee of Microsoft, but in China. I think he's since left Microsoft and is working on a project uh, on his own. I don't know if it's just him, but I'll try and find out. And it's geared towards newbies of Linux who are specifically coming from Windows 11 because it has the look and feel of Windows 11. But I'm going to take a look and see, what's up. Should be interesting. When you go to the Anduin OS site, which is AnduinOS.com, it's a nice site. It looks fine. There's plenty of information in there. However, when you go to the downloads part, you run into what I think of as the first kind of hit of a problem. You're presented with a bunch of folders like you would get on the Debian site, for example, which I'm not sure newbies would know really how to navigate or what to do with. You do get the ISO, the SHA-256 checksum, and a torrent file for each version of the software, each language version. So you have to find your own language version in somewhat cryptically named, files that, again, I'm not sure newbies would know how to parse through these. And then you can use a checksum to verify that the file you're downloading is correct. Once you have downloaded the ISO file, burned it to a USB, and boot it into the live environment, you can see it does look a lot like Windows 11. And it's based upon Ubuntu Plucky Puffin, which is the current 25.04 release, I believe. So it's up to date as far as that's concerned. You have a start menu that looks a lot like Windows. The apps are not familiar, but you have the same kind of start menu. You can install it from the installer here. And it goes through a pretty normal install process that you can see here. We'll speed through this for convenience here, as this takes a few minutes. So as you can see, if you're familiar with installing Linux, the install process is pretty straightforward. The Anduin OS doesn't seem to come with a lot of apps, which is fine, but just, again, being aimed at the sort of newbie user, you would expect it maybe to have a little more hand-holding, some basic apps like an Office suite installed and so on. It does not have that. It has the ability to install Office suites, obviously, but it doesn't have any installed. So my contention is, probably for several reasons, this is not really, I think, as user-friendly or newbie-friendly as it's being made out. First of all, the download file situation, the fact that it doesn't come with a lot of apps installed, which would require a new user to install those, which I think could be handled a little better. Both things like Zorin OS and Linux Mint have, the usual kind of bundled apps that you would expect in a Linux distro, a music player, video player, Office suite, things like that. So that's, I think, where this falls down a little bit. I think my only other complaint along those lines would be also that it seems to be basically handled by one person. Now, there are other Linux distros, sort of niche distros, like Nobara, which is essentially a one-man show. And these are good distros. There's nothing wrong with them in that regard, except that it's a person. If a person gets, God forbid, struck by a bus or, just loses the interest in the project, then potentially that project would just sort of die on the vine. So that would be another reason to maybe not recommend this as a newbie-friendly, as an attractive option for someone who's using Windows 11 currently. I did run the updates on the system, which is easy enough to do. It does come with kernel 6.14, which is pretty recent, so that's good. It's easy enough to navigate around. It follows some of the, most of the Windows 11 type conventions. You can pin things to the start menu. You can pin them to the system tray and so on. So it's quite usable in that regard. It's not a bad distro. Just as I said, the few things that could have struck me as being not conducive to being maybe a good match for somebody who's just coming fresh off of Windows 11. It certainly looks like Windows 11, but then there's some things about it that just don't make me have a warm, fuzzy feeling. So good effort. We'll see if it may be that he will extend the people he's, into some kind of team that he uses to keep us updated, or he may monetize it in some way, or something like that would make it a more viable thing for him to do as a full-time occupation. I believe the gentleman left Microsoft since this was launched. I'm not sure about that, but I seem to remember reading that somewhere. So, but it's interesting. It's not bad. It's like it's basically Ubuntu. The one thing they did, I noticed, was they did remove snaps from the system. You can add them back in, but by default, you have, apt regular programs through the GNOME App Store. You can install app images, and also Flatpak is set up as well. So there you go. That's a very quick look. And my sort of impressions of Anduin, I don't think it's anything to get too excited over, but yeah, it's something different to try. All right. Thanks for watching. So that's another video in the can. If you found this informative or interesting, please consider liking and subscribing down below. And remember, be excellent to each other.